Hello and welcome, humans and future sentient silicon beings, to the fourth age with Noah and Marty. Today we have an old friend of mine, Floyd Marinescu. Would you introduce yourself?
Hi, it's great to be here and really excited about this conversation. So my name's Floyd. I have a software developer education company that offers InfoQ.com. It's a news website for engineers. And QCon, it's a conference for software developers that runs in New York, San Francisco, and London. I'm also do a lot of nonprofit work. I ran it for the last 4 years. I've been running a basically what's like a marketing agency for an idea for universal basic income in Canada. That's really made a mark. It's been had an impact in Canada. We have 40,000 activists that regularly do things to help keep it alive in the country. And yeah, I'm a Star Trek fan, a bit of a futurist, researching ideas like
Perfect.
this and promoting them that I think we will need to have a better future. So among UBI, my other kind of passion project these days is the idea of land value tax and how that could improve the economy and improve how society works. Yeah, so that's kind of a full round. I'm also a
That's
dad of a
awesome.
9-month-old daughter. That's been an amazing experience as well, and yeah, it's really great. Looking forward to this chat.
I wonder if she'll ever have a driver's license. People keep asking me about that with my kids.
That is
Uh,
true.
I met Floyd. We worked. I worked with him on QCon San Francisco for a couple of years. What, 2014, 2015, somewhere around there. That was
Yeah.
awesome because we got to bring in lots of great speakers, and now I'm guessing AI must be all the rage at those at that conference. And you even had a QCon AI section, didn't you? Or a
We did. We were a bit early. It was yeah, that was like right before COVID.
okay,
But now we have enough AI content at QCon itself that that's probably enough.
yeah. Probably everybody wants to go to the AI content right now.
That's right.
So the universal basic income is something that I've been wanting to talk about, and of course you're the perfect person to talk about it with. Part of the theme of this podcast is that we're in a revolution, and if we look back at other revolutions, the like the Industrial Revolution, people lost jobs, people lost any awareness. Noah, what's your story about the gin
Well,
barrels?
yeah. Part and parcel of getting people from down on the farm and going to the city is that they lost their order of life and they had a lot more spare income, and so they started buying hard liquor in amounts that would be shocking even to hardcore alcoholics of today, and getting soused out of their minds. And gin mills were push cart vendors, similar to like hot dog vendors or you know the modern ice cream man, that sold bottles of gin to the working man and woman on the street on a regular basis.
Makes you wonder if they used the Industrial Revolution to increase quantities of glass bottles they could produce to sell
That
more gin.
that yes, that was definitely one of them. I remember I saw something about the use of quinine in I believe the Dutch East or West Indies, East Indies, right, to deal with malaria, and people objected that the amount of quinine in the G&T isn't sufficient to be medically significant. But what
Huh.
they failed to take into account is that the number of G&Ts that the colonial Dutch were drinking was actually more than a fifth a day, and at that level, it actually is
At that level.
medicinal.
Right, right.
Oh,
So,
wow.
but now on the other side of the Industrial Revolution, of course, there were way more jobs. It just sucked for a little while, kind of going through it, and depending on how you define this, I think people's lives were better off. Everybody could afford to have utensils at home. They could afford to have their own plates. They could have all the tools, and there's a lot less. Well, there was a new kind of poverty, but overall, people were had more things,
Well,
whether or not that's good or bad.
Well, let's.
not
I
just
mean,
more
yeah.
things. You have a fresh daughter. You have three children of your own.
I do,
Indoor
yeah.
plumbing
Indoor,
essentially
yes.
reduced the childhood mortality rate to effectively zero. I mean, it's obviously
Mhm.
tragic for any parent that has to lose a child, but imagine accepting a more or less 50% chance of losing a child at at
Hmm.
birth as a normal matter of course. That is
Right.
that is something that the Industrial Revolution gave us in the last century or so.
Yeah. On the note of a new kind of poverty, um, uh, it, these people who are moved out of the farms, they were really moved out of access to self-reliance and
Yes.
independence, because
Hmm.
people, as is commonly called, the commons, a lot of the land was commonly accessible. Hunting was free.
Hmm.
Things were available, and people lived in communities and worked as little as possible to have a decent life. And another
Yeah.
byproduct of the Industrial Revolution is being forced into a wage job just to survive on subsistence, which used to be free, used to be
Yep.
in charge of yourself. So this new kind of poverty was something that persisted. People living in kind of many times children working in factories in subhuman conditions
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
unfortunately is still true in some parts of the world today. And some of the main benefits, at least with regards to personal well-being, leisure time and disposable income and such, didn't come until generations later. At least
Yeah.
according to Mark Carney, who's the former Bank of Canada and England governor. I was pretty amazed. He said most of the real benefits to the working class didn't come until often 100 years later, and often it came
Wow.
because of the labor movement that worked for them in the face of like abject poverty and exploitation. So that's one of the things.
Wow.
If you contrast that today, yeah, I mean, a lot of people like to say, yeah, well, it creates more jobs and eventually leads to more prosperity, but for who? Like, not
And how
necessarily for
long?
this generation.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
And we're not going to get that prosperity unless you fight for it,
y-
and it's not just going to come to you out of nowhere.
a point I think that generally gets overlooked by Carney and other people pointing these things out is that the benefits also didn't accrue to the leaders of those societies either, because they aren't the leaders of the societies anymore.
Oh,
These sorts of
that's
these
interesting.
sorts of revolutions actually change literally everything. One of my standard examples is if you had a debate between Elizabeth I and Elizabeth II, although now that we've got Charles III, imagine a debate between Charles I and Charles III on the status of the British monarchy and the government of England. Charles I wasn't he the one that actually got killed by by the revolution?
Yes.
So the the governmental forms themselves also have to change because the flexibility required to support an innovative industrial economy is more dynamic than a feudal society can support. And
Oh, of course.
and so feudal society either had to, in certain very isolated pockets, voluntarily withdraw its own power and perquisites, and promote a society of freedom and sustenance, and in other cases, they just got murdered.
So, I'm wondering if we are at the equivalent, I don't know what they say, different dates on when the Industrial Revolution lasted, but roughly 1760 to 1830s, was it? Are we at 1761? And so if we are, uh, one of the big things I'd like to explore is how to, I think, Floyd, you alluded to this, how do we actively make it so that it's not so bad, if that is possible?
That's right. Well, and also to your point, Noah, yeah, leaders, someone didn't benefit, but a lot of people got rich. The capitalist,
New
the
leaders.
bourgeoisie, the capitalist class emerged, which is totally fine. I mean, what we want to do this time is a more equitable way to proceed to this revolution, so everyone benefits, and we don't have a period of despair for most people, which is what I'm concerned about. Because I know maybe I'll jump the gun here a bit, but um, having looked at automation and research papers on impacts on the labor market for a long time, I'm less concerned about some sort of mass loss of jobs and more concerned about masses of people being underemployed in lower income work,
Mhm.
because that is actually something that, as objectively, we have seen in the last 40 years of technological development, where we've seen the middle class shrinking. We've seen so we have something called an hourglass economy. Imagine it called job polarization. where yes, more people are joining the ranks of upper income earners, which is great. That's what we should have. But more people are joining the ranks of lower income earners with a smaller middle. And that's concerning because it's moving us towards a two-tiered society, much like it did in previous industrial revolutions. And uh, and and that's a great concern because technology should be making everyone's life better, not only some, while others are in increasingly precarious jobs that are sliced and diced, have no benefits, have no long-term pay, are contract based, where people are working 2 or 3 gig jobs to try and get by.
Hmm.
So that's the concern, and like the research often shows that when someone loses a skilled job because it's been automated, which actually happened to my father and my uncle. They were in automotive manufacturing in Canada, and during the automation wave of the late '90s and the early 2000s, which was in response to Chinese competition, the automation wave took out, like, the industry contracted by half in Ontario,
Hmm.
and as the research has shown that for I think 4/5 of all the jobs lost in that period were lost to technology, not to globalization. Globalization may have been a trigger point, but the automation was just ready to be thrown in, as it is in any crisis. Companies have to survive, so they reach to the latest technology of the day to cut costs, whether it's due to a downturn or increased competition or whatever. But both of them had to take lower income work because those jobs weren't available anymore. So that's usually what happens. So
Yeah.
I'm just concerned about moving towards a two-tiered society that eventually moves us to the kind of extreme inequality we see in dystopian sci-fi. And I'm very concerned with how do we create a more of a utopian future
And
so
we're
that we
seeing
all
that.
share in the
We're
gains.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we're seeing that. We had one example was this woman was saying that she lost 50% of her voiceover work overnight. Like, I guess she does audiobooks, and it just went away. And I think that wasn't even necessarily because of AI, but the perception that AI is good enough. So, if it's going to cost 5 cents to narrate this book, but it's crappy but okay enough. I think that's where a lot of these jobs are going, and it's still missing a lot of the nuance that her voice would lend to. So we don't even need to have good AI to start the job loss. Now, actually, some of the AI is getting good enough to I think replace humans with voiceover, but now writers are starting to lose their job. We had a writer on last week. I think he's not so worried yet because he said it's still not as good as a human, but I'm wondering how much longer that's going to be. Comedy seems to be safe at the moment.
Yeah.
It's one of the
Well,
few jobs. But programming is also, everybody I talk to who's coding says that they're coding about 20% faster. And the way I see it is that's now everybody's got to use it. And that means about 20% probably fewer jobs.
yeah. I mean, it's a economy that becomes more efficient, does more with less, which means less demand on wage growth,
Hmm.
as we can do more proportionally than we could before. Like, you may have seen those photos of the largest companies. I think it was like a Ford plant in the 1960s. You could see, like, looks like 10,000 people in a photo, and then you see a
Yes.
picture of, like, the team of Instagram, which had the same market cap, or like it's just like 20 people. Like
20
in
people. There was this video of NASA in the during Apollo 11, and I thought it was. I didn't know what I was looking at first, but they were panning the camera down the data center, I guess, and it was massive, like hundreds of thousands of square feet space, and just rows of people constantly throughout the entire thing, all probably replaced by one laptop right now.
wow.
Um,
Yeah. So,
yeah.
like, I want to illustrate again, kind of really make it simple to understand how this will lower wages, because everyone thinks, oh, technology raises wealth. Well, it creates wealth, but it doesn't necessarily create more work opportunities.
Hmm.
Let's go back to the Luddites, right? The famous example of there's these skilled upper middle class people that were creating textiles, in the previous two industrial revolutions ago. When the loom was invented, uh, uh, their employers could now employ less skilled people who could produce 3 or 4 times more output using looms. So the Luddites were people who used to have really good, skilled, middle class jobs, dignified jobs, that freaked out because now they had to be on subsistence again, competing with teenagers who are using looms.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's what we see in frequently when there's automation happening. Like, my dad was telling me that, yeah, like, after some of the CAD software that came out, like, that was just doing more efficiently what drafting designers would do, less skilled people would be using fancier software to do the same amount of work. And this leads to, like, a prediction I have with truck drivers. It may be that in all those examples, by the way, productivity increased. So they may have even had more jobs, like more jobs of people creating clothing and textiles because creating clothing became
Yep.
cheaper but the
Hmm.
pay to those workers was significantly lower.
Right.
So if you look at truck drivers, the long haul routes will probably be fully automated within the next 15 years. Those are the routes that are really crappy and hard and pay six figures.
Yeah.
And I
Right.
think we may end up having more jobs in the cities where there's millions of people that compete for those jobs, so the wages will be lower. So instead of having truck drivers, you'll have couriers is a better way of
Yeah.
thinking about it.
Or maintenance,
Where
because now
like,
you've got 10,000 times more trucks, so you need way more wheels replaced, and they need more wheels made, and that's probably all factory work too.
yeah. So it
Well,
may create more jobs, but they'll be lower paid jobs. And that's the thing to take away about the trucking automation.
right. So one issue with those is that so far we've seen computer technology being rolled out in ways that effectively exploit the existing asymmetries in communication and planning, to effectively focus the value proposition to the top end of the decision making hierarchy, which is natural enough. However, that's not an intrinsic pattern of the computer technology itself. It's more a consequence of computer technology being naively introduced into social and economic structures like companies that go back for centuries, and were built around the necessity for human decision making. But we know that human decision making sucks, so we should be abandoning it. For example, in the way my market system functions, I divide the market not between buyers and sellers or price makers and price takers, as traditional markets do, but rather between producers, consumers, and forecasters. And because of the differential stability questions of a three-sided versus a two-sided game, what this allows is actually controlling the total revenue available to the sort of planning guidance people, in exchange for radically higher rates of return. And so a system like that effectively removes that top end you're talking about, and builds back the middle. And once again, computers as a demonstrably indifferent bystander capable of carrying out complex judgment is a critical part of that kind of approach. It's perfectly reasonable, I think, to build out similar kinds of ideas for other economic and political and cultural questions. And again, as with the leaders of past societies, the options are pretty much going along or being destroyed because the society that they're leading is rapidly disappearing. We see greater and greater cultural and political divides, along with these greater economic divides that you're talking about.
I'm wondering, the game I'd love to play is, if we're starting to talk about entering a new revolution, I've been really curious to see how we could replay previous revolutions. So the loom example, if we had known it was coming, what would be the options? Would it, for these people who are about to lose their job, is there an option, or does this job just go away? I mean, there's retraining is another interesting area that I've been kind of wondering about. Uh, I think they did this with the coal workers under Obama. The idea was coal's going away, so let's start to teach them to do something else like coding is the the usual answer these days. Of course, that might become a problem too soon. Um, but yeah, I've been wanting to play that game around what could we do with the loom workers, or is there just nothing to be done?
Yeah, well, this is a similar example, but I think in the 80s there was a commission in Canada that was proposing what's to do to have a better economy and society, called the Carter Commission, I think it was. And among other things, it proposed free trade, and it also proposed a guaranteed annual income. Uh,
Hmm.
and it suggested that those two things should go together because as people's jobs get lost to trade, to various efficiencies that would happen, they need time to adjust, time for transition. And of
Right.
course, we got free trade, we didn't get a guaranteed basic income. So I mean, obviously, a policy I talk a lot about is that we should have at least a basic income, if not a universal basic income, in place to help people in that transition, so they can always have the means to re-educate and to pursue their potential, or at the very least, so that automation benefits everybody, and we're working a little bit less, not a lot more.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that safety net. So even if you lose your job for a little bit, you're not, complete catastrophe, losing your house, losing your car, losing your tools of the trade.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the area you've been really diving into. Could you just kind of I don't know. Do you have a spiel for anybody who has not really heard of this to kind of dive into it? And then I think it'd be really interesting to talk about how this might be useful in this exact economy where we're about to go straight into a new revolution.
Sure. Yeah, basic income is the idea that we can create a income floor for everyone in society, that no one goes beneath a certain level of income. That way we eliminate poverty, and the amount that's suggested is generally to be at the poverty level, so that everyone who is out of work at least is not in abject poverty. We avoid the costs to society of that in terms of the healthcare and crime and just homelessness, so people can afford to live. And then the money we make from work is just above that. So anyone who wants to have a good life, obviously there's still incentive to work and to have a good life. But we avoid all the costs, the bureaucracies, the inhumanity of poverty.
Hmm.
There's generally two kinds of basic income when it's discussed. There's a guaranteed basic income, a guaranteed annual income, which has been almost passed in the U.S. Congress in the late 60s under Nixon. Martin Luther King started advocating for it quite strongly before he was assassinated, which I wonder if that had something to do with it. And it was a way to Milton Friedman on the right of the economic spectrum has been for it. Many left-wing economists have been for it. It's the idea that there's a benefit amount that you get more of it as your income decreases. So maybe the actual maximum benefit is say $2,000 a month, but the amount decreases as your income grows, and it phases out slowly. So that probably around like 50K of job income, you wouldn't have any more of it. So this would replace the existing social welfare system, because a
Hmm.
lot of people are in there because they need money, not because they necessarily need counseling. But you would still need counseling. You still need
Yeah.
support services like that. But a lot of people wouldn't need to be in there just for cash. It would reduce red tape, reduce the size of government bureaucracy, and bring a lot
So
of dignity to these people's lives. And then
so
the
you
other
would
kinds of basic
receive.
income is,
Sorry, I
yeah,
was
go
just
ahead.
curious. In that system, does everybody receive a baseline, or is it? It sounded like as you drop an income, there's some sort of a calculation that just starts sending you a check.
Friedman's
Yeah.
formulation was sometimes called the negative income tax, where people who were
Hmm.
Yeah.
below a certain income would effectively get a supplement, and so at a zero income, your negative tax would be this, say, $2,000 a month. As your income increased, that supplement would decline. Once you hit, say, $50,000 or some other magic number, it would be zero, and then above that, positive income taxes would
You pay into it,
progressive and kick in,
right?
and so on.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so instead of the floor being zero, it sort of shifts it up a bit
Right.
That's right.
to the
Um,
poverty level, which makes a lot of sense. And then what's the
yeah.
other system, Floyd?
The other system is a universal basic income, so everyone gets the same amount, even millionaires.
Mm.
And
Okay.
that's what Andrew Yang was running on in his presidential run. And his idea was a 10% consumption tax would be a way to give everyone $1,000 a month. As he was arguing, everyone can have a share of every Uber ride and every Google search and every Facebook ad. So we're all benefiting from the value of technology. And I
Hmm.
think in many parts of the U.S., $1,000 a month is the poverty line. Certainly not in the big cities, but in more rural areas and such, that would bring a lot of people out of poverty.
Interesting. And why is it so that why keep the 1,000 even if you're able to afford it? Is it just so that there's no transition across these two lines?
His argument is that it's more of I guess, a libertarian one, like avoid the bureaucracy of any sort of income
Mm.
testing for
Okay.
this, keep it simple, and give everyone a sense of civic sort of co-ownership in the economy.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and that's quite compelling. But I see
Hmm.
those two programs as potentially addressing different things. The amount of tax reform to implement a UBI at a meaningful amount, like $2,000 a month, is almost mind-boggling. Although you could
Hmm.
have a guaranteed basic income done quite reasonably.
Hmm.
In Canada, it would be roughly like 5% of total government expenditures could pay for one. But I see a fixed amount for everyone as actually more of a form of commonwealth. If you look at Alaska, they have an investment fund called a permanent fund that's based on oil revenues
Mm.
that
Mhm.
currently pays $2,000 a year to all Alaskans.
Oh,
So
wow.
getting the same amount
I didn't
to me
know that.
makes sense if you have an equal share and or equal right to something.
Okay.
Otherwise, I think the guaranteed amount is more reasonable and is likely to actually be realistic when governments really start talking about this. Um, yeah, there's pros and cons to both,
Wow.
but yeah,
I had no idea that Alaska does this. Is it, how are they, I mean, this must be
The
is this the
oil,
biggest test
the
of
oil and
UBI?
mineral
The
wealth.
oil,
That's
right. And
that's
is this the biggest
it,
test of UBI in the world?
you could say that. I mean, it's $2,000 a year, but however, it
Oh,
is
oh, okay, okay. That's not
resulted in
quite enough though.
Alaska. Yeah, but Alaska is the most equal state in the U.S. because of it, and neither
Uh-huh.
Republicans nor Democrats are willing to touch it.
Yeah.
They'd rather raise income taxes than raid the permanent fund.
No, right, right, right. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
well, Gulf oil states
So,
do somewhat better, and of course, the Indian tribes that operate casinos or casino networks have similar kinds of things, and the Indian tribes with some external counseling have pretty specifically gone away from money sharing and rather bought goods. So they'll set
mm,
up hospitals and schools and things like that with the money, and then provide a sort of social structure with, say, free medical care, free education, and other things like that with the money, rather than cutting everybody a check for whatever one tribe's share of the revenue of
yeah.
the casino is.
I mean, this seems pretty
Although,
compelling.
but there are some tribes that do pay dividends, like $1,000 a month
They
per person,
Mm,
and those tribes,
they
yeah,
do also have a monetary supplement and stipend, yes, but the bulk
yeah,
of the money is going into these other kinds of programs. But if in terms of talking about places that have kind of free money for citizens, that would be another example inside the United States. Several of the oil countries do things like this as well, and so there are other examples.
mhm.
mm,
Yeah. Um, to the loom example, I'm guessing. Yeah. So this would keep the guys. They wouldn't be able to get the same lucrative job again, but it would keep them from flatlining on the zero mark.
Well,
yeah. So maybe the way to think about it, if you contrast it to previous revolutions, is a guaranteed-based income makes sure everyone has a chance to retrain and pursue better work as they've been automated away
Hmm.
at a meaningful amount that they don't fall into poverty.
Hmm.
And a universal one means everyone gets a share of the incomes that looms are generating, which is
Yep.
a bit of a different view, and it sounds very exciting in some ways, but
Mhm.
it's a very different intent.
Yeah, at the time of the last revolution, land was of significantly greater import is a productive factor, and so most of the arguments sort of swirled around land reform, and so that's where a lot of the rubber met the road, as it were, in terms of maintaining or not maintaining serfdom and peasantry, and that sort of acted as sort of a pressure cooker, where the nobles that managed to maintain their serfs into the 20th century, and I'd say a pretty reasonable endpoint for the Industrial Revolution would probably be somewhere in the mid 20th century, actually, when the shift, probably somewhere around the Boeing 747,
Mhm.
is where we stop seeing industrial progress
60.
and start seeing computational and communication progress being the primary action
Mm.
in human structure, if you will. Uh,
Mhm.
that's where I would put it anyway. But
And actually, around the same timeline is the impacts of the New Deal, all the labor
Mhm.
reform that you could argue created the middle class, and I'm fond of the view. I think it was God, I forgot you know him, but anyway, says that the middle classes might have been a coincidence actually of the timing of the emergence of the Industrial Revolution, World War II, and the New Deal. So there's nothing set I mean, capitalism does not naturally create a middle class. It leads to two-tiered systems and extreme inequality. So we need programs like labor rights, and I think this time we'll need a basic income to maintain the benefits of middle class life, hopefully for everybody. Um, and that's kind of what I'm fighting for.
I'm curious. So we saw, what was it, a couple months ago? Sam Altman, a couple others got in front of Congress because Congress was sufficiently freaked out about the whole AI thing that suddenly popped up with ChatGPT and to a lesser extent some of these other technologies. But ChatGPT, I think, was really the impetus that scared the crap out of everybody. And I'm wondering if you're starting to see any more nudging or any more push on things like UBI that now that Congress and Canadian Parliament and other places are freaked out. The thing is, I don't think they understand what's going on, or I don't think that they understand that this very much could look like a revolution very, very fast. I think they're more freaked out that, you know, they might lose their job because people will realize that, hey, we could have an AI do your job better, or just their constituents are about to lose some jobs. But I don't think that there's an understanding that this is much like an industrial revolution or the internet computer revolution.
Yeah, well, I don't think technology specifically is driving that. I mean, someone like Andrew Yang really put it on the map because he has such a good narrative and
Mm-hmm.
he was such a good storyteller.
Now that was what,
Um,
8 years ago, right? Or
yeah,
10 years ago?
2018,
Oh, is it? Oh,
2018.
2018. Okay, so not too
Yeah.
long. Okay, okay, but
So
certainly predating the ChatGPT revolution. I guess
yeah,
the
I think
whole.
I mean COVID really put this on the map in a lot of countries, including Canada,
Mm,
because
hmm.
what happened during COVID in places like Canada and the US is we had income supports that resembled the basic income in that they were sufficient. They were actually
Yeah,
above poverty, the
right.
poverty level, but they also resembled welfare in that you lose all of it when you went to work.
Hmm.
Kind of both camps got a lot of awareness and ammunition there, except maybe for the wrong reasons. So what we saw there is actually poverty rates decreased dramatically during COVID because of these income
Hmm.
supports.
Hmm.
We saw actually one of the benefits of basic income that wages went up. Like leisure and hospitality industry had to offer better wages and benefits because people could
Right.
negotiate better pay. They could hold themselves out of the market temporarily. We saw many of the benefits. We also saw many of the problems that people think basic income would create. Where anecdotally, a lot of people were not going back to work. They were not going necessarily back to bad jobs because they
Hmm.
would lose their benefit, yeah, if they
I,
went to
I kind
work.
of like that because there was a bunch of people in our area being like, "No, I don't want to work at KFC. I hate this shit job." And I think I think COVID helped them. We used to have a rule at Pinterest and Reddit that was if somebody left for whatever reason, say they just need a break for 3 weeks, they're not coming back. And I think the reason is that you get a chance to reflect on life and be like, well, what do I actually want to be doing? And maybe it's not being at the current place you're at. Um,
It is, and I'll say like many people say we're still in a bit of a labor shortage now. Like, how
mhm,
come? Well, I think because a lot of people actually during COVID had a chance to pursue better jobs and move into better industries and get better pay,
mhm.
and we're still addressing the aftermath of that, which frankly is great. I mean, labor shortages always lead to higher wages and better negotiating power for workers.
Is there a link between that then and the inflation that we had over the last year? Is there an argument to be made on that?
Well, so in the sense that what was done was radically inflationary, and I've gone through this before with people. There's basically three phases of inflation. Phase one is asset prices go up. This is when you can stop it, and this is when everybody's in favor of it. Phase two is commodity prices go up. Some people complain, some people are happy. Phase three is when labor prices go up. That's when everybody's really unhappy and says, what's with all this inflation all of a sudden? Well, the inflation already
Uh-huh,
happened. That inflation is done. The
uh-huh.
printing of extra money, the creation of vacuous credit, that was all inflationary. That happened decades or years or sometimes weeks ago, but it all happened already. And now
Hmm.
the world is reflecting the fact that we decided to make money worthless, and so you have to give people a lot more of it to get them to fry chicken for a living. And so some of the inflation was caused by that, but the lion's share of the inflation of the last decade-ish is still the aftermath of the global financial crisis, which hasn't actually started yet. We
Hmm.
just decided to print unending amounts of trillions of dollars in virtually every developed economy on Earth so that everyone could pretend that nobody had messed up anything now 15 years ago. Um,
Right.
and
2008. Yeah.
they did. I'm sorry. Every successful person was wrong about basically everything and has been for every second of the last 15 years. And that's just a fact. Um,
Right. Right.
and
I I wondered. Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense to me. The thing that I've always wondered is if you had universal basic income, would it just contribute to inflation? But it seems like universal basic income, and Floyd, you mentioned this before, combined with free trade, would in theory not lead to inflation because the free trade and the free market would decide market level prices.
not so, not necessarily there, but more in the case, I think, of something you were mentioning earlier, Floyd, that I think the guy from OpenAI was advocating that if you combine it with a tax, so like think about say religions. Most religions have some kind of tithing structure. So let's
Tithing.
say you're in a religion that's actually serious about tithe. So 10% of everybody's income in the religion is going to the church. If the church can live on say half of that, one thing they could do with the other half is divide it by the number of congregants and hand everybody a pile of cash equal to that, at which point that church would have a universal basic income equal to 5% of the average income of their congregation. 5% of the average income of a subset of society might be below that society's poverty line. It might be above that. It might be on that society's poverty line. So Yang felt that $12,000 a year could be hit with what was it, a 5% or 10% consumption, 10
10,
10% consumption
10%
tax.
VAT tax.
Um,
Yeah.
it sounds like the OpenAI guys are getting their picks and shovels out for a standard libertarian idea of asset value taxing. So there's no practical difference between wealth taxes on capital like stocks and real estate and land taxes plus corporate sequestration of shares to a public fund. Those are mathematically identical. They're not politically exactly the same thing, but they're mathematically identical. Um, and
So what are you contrasting? Capital taxes versus land taxes, or those two versus consumption tax?
uh, so what I'm saying is that all three of those things are ways to offset the payments being made to create a non-inflationary system. If the income is equaling the outgo, then you would be non-inflationary. But if part of the difference is making up, so another option you could have for setting up a UBI would be just to turn on the printers, cut everybody a check for whatever the number is, and send it out. That would be explicitly and consistently inflationary because you'd be literally printing the money. But you could also do that. And what that would effectively do is create a broad consumption slash wealth tax on everybody because you'd be slightly diminishing the value of money by creating a bunch of it and then just spewing it across the entire economy simultaneously.
Yeah, so in the basic income movement, no one's seriously suggesting money printing as a way to do this. It's they're suggesting progressive taxation or stuff like that, or capturing more of the resource revenues like Alaska has. So in that context, I don't believe basic income would be inflationary because you're not printing money. You're recirculating money in a way that's progressive and in a way that, frankly, is more efficient. Because half the population will use money more efficiently and contribute to GDP growth than a few rich people who have it hoarded in the bank and are not spending it.
Yeah,
So if you look at inflation,
I'm sorry.
I don't believe. I'll just finish this thought. I don't believe that spending on basic goods like food and non-perishables, which certainly Amazon and China can we have enough production capacity to respond to those things. The elasticity is enough that it
Hmm.
wouldn't be
Right.
inflationary on basic goods. It might be slightly inflationary on low income housing because that isn't fixed supply and that can be addressed through other policies. But this idea of mass inflation in the context of a guaranteed basic income that is helping mostly people that are close to poverty, that doesn't make sense. That would be inflationary to me. And the idea of central bank money printing is actually more realistic to happen in terms of cash transfers as a form of monetary policy to stimulate economic growth that would kind of come and go as economic conditions change. I don't see that ever being a meaningful amount to address poverty. It's more like, hey, central bank says we need to grow the economy. Give everyone $300 so we can see what happens next month. It's more like the stimulus check that I believe didn't Bush send everyone $1,000 during 2008 or something like that. It was
Something
like
like that.
one-off stimulus checks.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, stimulus checks is not the same as a basic income because it's not
Right.
long
You can't
term.
rely on it too.
Right.
That's
So
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
I would agree with the first part of your statement. The second part, so the issues that I have with the UBI arguments I've seen.
Am I coming through? Is it too bright? Sorry, the sun
We,
is
we,
on my
we could see
screen
you
there.
a
Yeah,
little bit, but the
you
sun is getting
yeah, you
excited.
might want to draw a curtain if you want to be able to be seen well in clips, because backlighting is not your friend.
Okay,
It's a
let me
little.
move a bit closer away from the sun.
That's a bit better. Um,
Okay.
so the like I said, the two issues that I've seen not addressed are habituation and dependency. Um, I'm not actually that optimistic that we wouldn't see price shifts in basic goods under a UBI, because I can't see anything that wouldn't cause us to have price shifts in basic goods under UBI, because the prices are set by sort of supply and demand coming together, and there's a lot of long-term research on things from public safety to sort of living conditions and all sorts of things, that human beings sort of try to live the kind of life that they expect to live, and so I would expect a UBI to create new vectors of exploitation to eliminate itself once it became a permanent part of society, for no other reason than that would be the natural response to that sort of change. So a UBI without an associated change of cultural values tied into the UBI strikes me as not likely to result in the kinds of what I would regard as optimistic outcomes. The second is dependency. Um, Another example of UBI would be the bread and circuses of the late Roman period, where in fact every member of the mob was guaranteed a basic and dignified existence as the rulers of all mankind in the world's greatest city. And that's much better than any UBI that's presently being floated to sort of current political stances. And what it led to was extraordinary political stagnation and then social and cultural decay and collapse. The I could see a UBI being a very attractive thing for a government that could attach its citizens' voting loyalty to itself in exchange for the UBI and being politically possible on those grounds alone. But I don't see where you get past that next hurdle. And so my take is that the proposals that exist actually need to have a pretty fair amount of randomness added to them in order to cope with those natural human instincts. So if I were to sort of support a UBI, it would be something like, rather than maybe a $20,000 or $25,000 check to everybody in the country every year, a 1% chance of getting a $2.5 million check each year that everybody's involved in, which is the same amount of money, which could be funded through the same kind of a thing, but which causes the kind of punctuated equilibrium and requires a change in the social structure, because suddenly your extended friends and family network basically is getting 1.5-ish millionaires produced through the lottery every year. And that kind of social structure, if it could be proposed, I'm not really an expert on like what makes people tick, in a way that seemed stable, is something that seems like it would be supportable. Whereas the blanket version is too easy to adapt to, in my view. And I'm just pretty sure that predatory financial interests will rapidly figure out how to close that gap and collect that income for themselves.
Do we already have this with welfare though? Welfare
Uh, we do,
welfare.
we do, and in
Okay.
fact, the relative condition of people accepting welfare has been consistently degradatory, more or less since its inception. We have vastly greater rates of self-reported unhappiness, much more recidivism, lower rates of wedlock, higher rates of illegitimacy, worse educational outcomes, all over the last 60-ish years in this country. And
You mean since its inception, it got worse?
yes, basically.
Well, I mean, I think the way to look at that it is not because it's there, these things follow, but how much worse would it be without it?
Mm.
And so, I do want to address some of these issues. Like just the two things happen concurrently doesn't mean one is causal of the other. Like what I heard about the bread and circuses and the Romans was not because of the plight of lower income people. It's because the grand estate owners consolidated so much that basically the feudal lords took over much of production, and there wasn't enough middle class jobs. So it's not because of the UBI. It's because of a mass monopoly concentration of wealth that led to the economic political stagnation. And with regards to the market might adapt to exploit, I mean, we just don't really see evidence of that. I mean, Canada introduced a child credit in 2015, or rather, it increased it substantially, which reduced poverty by 20%. We didn't see inflation during that time. We actually saw jobs, unemployment rate falling, the economy getting a lot better. In the US, we have the EITC, which is a very small cash supplement to low income workers. There's no argument. I don't think there's any reason to say that that would actually make their lives worse. They have a few extra bucks in their pocket. And, much of, I think, the arguments you'd say about increased, the declining quality of people living at or near poverty is because the social welfare payments have not kept up with inflation. It's just inadequate. It has to be adequate for people to have the ability to lift themselves up and pursue their potential. If it's inadequate, you're just trapping people in sub-poverty
Well,
conditions.
yeah, but I would argue that a non-trivial part of that is the political motivations to actually put these things together in the first place, which includes not paying for them, which is then inflationary, because the politician can essentially get paid in both directions. They get paid for giving the one dependent person money, and then they get paid for not taking the money to pay for that program from the elite person. So they get both ends of the support, and then they're happy, and all it costs is declining economic condition for the country. Everybody wins.
Especially the
Right. The
Yeah, I
politicians.
mean,
politician wins, his
that
constituents win, his donors win. Uh, this is Hamilton's formulation that more or less the purpose of civilian government is public corruption. That if the powerful use their power to improve the wealth of the wealthy, then the wealthy will use their wealth to improve the power of the powerful, and powerful people become more powerful, wealthy people become more wealthy, everybody's happy, stable government ensues.
well, I think we're going to face a big enough disruption, kind of rewinding a bit,
Hmm.
if automation moves fast enough and we see a particular class or group of people large enough to be displaced fast enough, I think there'll be the grounds there for a new social contract, whether it's a basic income or some sort of more permanent form of unemployment insurance that lasts a lot longer. Mark Carney was saying that we need a way for 40-year-olds to afford to go back to university to learn something new, because this is just the reality of the situation we're in. Taking that a bit further, if you believe that our markets generate good paying jobs, then why do we accept a situation where two-thirds of people in poverty are working? I would argue that we already need income supplements for working people today. I see that as a way of sharing in the wealth we're creating so that no one's in poverty. So regardless of automation is driving, I think, a lot of this reduction in job quality for the bottom half of the population. So why not have a permanent dependency on income recirculation if that's the best markets can do? Because we all deserve to benefit together. And we live in this illusion that jobs should be the way to get ahead. But that hasn't been true since the New Deal. It hasn't been true for 50 years. Like the plight of the middle class and the lower income people is decreasing.
Yes, I would strongly agree with that. I think that what you're saying essentially demonstrates, inarguably, that the leaders in all societies are failures, which is necessarily
No
true.
problem. Okay.
In a situation where they are successfully gaining positions in institutions based on assumptions rooted in the industrial situation, where decisions and planning has to be accomplished by human neural tissue. But machines can do those jobs more effectively and considerably less expensively than human beings. And so the difficulty of the two-tiered society I see as less the declining value of labor and an increased proportion and disappointment in poverty, and rather the fact that while this is going on, it is possible for people at the top of the society to obtain rewards for management of a society that is going to hell in a handbasket. And so I think a more profitable vector of action is actually to bring actual sort of culpability and responsibility to those who are culpable and responsible for these things. Which it,
I, I,
Marty?
I want to write I want to write Congress GPT, and I'm not joking about that. And there's two things, or maybe more things I'd like to get out of it. But one of them, I would love it to just sit there during congressional debates and just call bullshit. And second, I would love it to have less, who knows what's in the mind of so many congressmen, but I feel like if you were to back up the story to what they're trying to achieve, it's to win the next term. So they will say whatever they got to say or whatever crazy thing, not to benefit people, but to benefit their winning. And I wonder, you could probably make same thing with a manager. You could make a manager or a congressman out of GPT that's motivation is aligned with what you want it to be, I would think. I mean, I'm not sure where they're technologically yet,
I'd
but
imagine,
it might
yeah.
be.
So if you were at the first demonstration of a locomotive and said this is the end of monarchy, you may well get executed for lese majesty at that point. But we know, with the benefit of hindsight,
There is no
that it
problem.
is absolutely the end of monarchy. That it is no longer practicable for that form of government and social organization to exist in a world where so much more wealth and military power and cultural power can be generated from machines rather than muscles. I think it's entirely unreasonable to claim that Fortune 1000 CEOs have a future of any meaningful description, certainly the current meaningful description. And so I think it's a lot easier to lean on that end of things rather than see. I see UBI as an extremely stagnating force, similar again to the bread and circuses. The reason that those monopolistic powers are placating the mob and giving them, a centuries of games and so on, is to secure those monopolies for as long as possible, which of course decay around the edges and lead to the fall of Europe and the Mediterranean region. Same thing here, although I don't think our current industrial things are nearly as stable as agrarian systems are. So I'd imagine we'll fall apart significantly faster. And I would argue that the current political turmoil we see around the world is strong evidence for that case. But lean on that end of things. Find out what it is that financial, political, and other sorts of leaders, what services are they actually providing, and take a look at that from a computational standpoint and see to what extent we can do without them. And I would venture a strong proposition that the answer is pretty much completely in basically every phase, because we know for a fact that these things can make decisions better than we can see more than we can consider more than we can be more meticulous than we can. So to the extent that planning or forecasting are valuable things that they're providing, we can either generate market structures that allow them to participate as effectively freelance helpers to the general economy, raising the standard of living for everybody, or Congress GPT, and we can have
Yeah.
blather produced. I mean, ChatGPT can create nonsense at a vastly greater rate than any human being will ever physiologically be able to produce.
But hopefully without the weird motivations that congressmen seem to
I'm
have.
pretty sure ChatGPT has motivations that are at least as weird, if not weirder, based on what we've seen both from the filtering and the various attempts to crack the filtering. But if it comes down to a volume fight, which in many cases we've seen politically it does, I'd imagine ChatGPT would come out the winner.
Floyd, I was curious about with different UBI schemes. So Canada's got more safety net, like for healthcare, and England does as well. Does that also come into the equation? Because I've wondered. It's probably easier to dole out money, but what about services being doled out that effectively would lead to that poverty level being or raising everybody above the poverty level? Because I know one big issue in the U.S. we have is you get cancer, okay, you're screwed for the rest of the time.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of harkens back to what Noah said, that what if other parts of the market start to exploit the poor, knowing that they have a guaranteed income? So obviously, healthcare is one vector there, and I think the U.S. is addressing that through Medicaid, which is
Yeah.
insufficient, but at least is something. And single payer systems like Canada have almost everything free, and people here don't really think about
Yeah.
worrying about health insurance or what happens if they get sick. I mean, yeah, certainly having all the various having all the various services one might require to subsist be provided through services. I mean, like healthcare and having enough money to go to a grocery store instead of going to a food bank. You don't need food banks if you have a basic income,
Yeah.
because the market will supply the foods. And it's another thing I differ slightly with on Noah, is that if you believe in the market, then you believe that capitalism will lower prices, even if people at the bottom have a little bit more cash in their pockets. Yeah, certainly having socialized healthcare takes one of the major cost centers off the table, so that a basic income would be more effective.
I
Because if you had a basic income but you had to pay for your
I
doctor's
would
visits, you'd be
yes,
screwed.
I agree with all of that. I would like to follow up, Marty. The specific reason I no longer believe in the marketplace is because AI has already destroyed the marketplace, sadly.
Wow,
So
let's hear about
so
that.
the market is based, yes, the
Great.
markets are based on what's known as a double-sided open call auction. Basically, there's two lines of people who want to buy and people who want to sell. They declare how much they want to buy or sell for, and they line up. And the notion is that there's a liquidity. Basically, how many people are in those lines gives you a stability of understanding of what the structure of desire and the structure of ability is, and so you can tailor your own needs to the counterparty side, see what's going on. That's the theory, and that used to be true maybe a century ago. But over the last 50 years now, we've been heavily electronicizing all of these things, and most cases, trades result in most of the market liquidity drying up and recharging. So effectively, what's happened with just dumb computer technology is that the markets have effectively become an open fraud where they're no longer providing the service of liquidity because the people who have the money can take it off the table if it's ever at risk. In the last couple of decades, we've seen actual AI systems joining that, which decrease the stability of the marketplaces because the people who are in the center, a better version of the market is essentially price makers and price takers, those who come to the market because they need the good or service or they need to sell the good or service, and those who live in the market because they can beneficially trade with both sides. The In that scenario, the more noisy the marketplace is, the more the middlemen can charge for their services. And with computers enabling vast reduction in their costs of risk, that makes the markets fundamentally more noisy. Whether the markets have gone from being beneficial to non-beneficial, I don't have a reasonable guess on. I know that their benefits have been in decline for effectively my entire lifetime, and that they will cross the 0 point at some point if they haven't already. And that will be one of the things that leads to the collapse of societies as they presently exist, whether we decide to build ones that actually work or not.
So, if everybody has $1,000 in their pocket per month, what stops? Why would the cost of a banana go up if I can produce it for 50 cents, and it's currently being charged $1? My neighboring
Because who cares what it
grocery store
who
charges
cares what
90
it costs to produce? So you can produce it for you can produce it profitably for say a quarter, and Floyd can move it from you to somebody that will buy it for 50 cents. Okay, so you make a quarter, Floyd makes a quarter. Fine. Floyd discovers that he will sell precisely the same number of bananas, selling them for 60 cents. The market says, why doesn't he start doing that? And why does he give you any money? He gives you a quarter. You produce the number of bananas that people used to buy for 50 cents. You produce that number for quarters each. He gives you a quarter each for them. There's no inflation in the system. Prices, your production costs aren't changing. He
But isn't Bob over here saying there's 10 cents to be made on there?
So if Bob and Floyd were in a market that effectively forced them to be competitive with one another, that would be true. But Bob and Floyd are actually in markets that have lost their ability to cause them to be co-competitive, and instead they're now competing against the edges and increasing the total amount of cross, because Floyd doesn't in fact get that entire 35 cents. There's actually several hundred Floyds that are each trying to chisel out an extra tenth of a penny, and now there's an opportunity for 100 more of those people to flood in to chisel out 100 more tenth pennies to get that price up to 60 cents.
Why in that case? I mean, the key point is that you said if there's competitive markets, why wouldn't more countries activate and create banana fields and provide?
Because
Like,
the incomes
what's the
don't go
constraint there?
up. So we saw this when Ukraine happened. Global wheat prices spiked. Global wheat production did no such thing because there was no translation of global wheat price to actual global wheat producers, because the market was able to chew up the entire difference. What the existing markets are competitive if everybody in them is a human being, but everybody in them isn't a human being anymore. The price makers are now dominantly AI computer systems,
AI.
and they want to make the most money for themselves, and so they can achieve that by widening the differences, and they have the strategic and tactical capacities to do that, and those capacities will continue to increase as the technology improves.
So I think we're going to need a part 2 for this. I had one more question, Floyd. Why politically is this difficult? Like I've always wondered if I went out to the masses and said, "I'll give you $1,000 to vote for me," which is illegal, but effectively I'm saying that. I don't understand why people are not saying, "Yeah, I'll take $1,000," except it's scary. You know, the word socialism gets thrown out and people get scared shitless.
Yeah, well, because a lot of reasons. We have our old beliefs that there are enough jobs for everyone, and
Hmm.
that people should just work. There's the fact that, well, this would result in an increase in taxes, and who's going to pay for it? And there's not enough literacy right now that it could be done in a way that doesn't cost most voters. So
Hmm.
that's just often a counterpoint that's used to scare people. And yeah, I mean, fortunately, we're not in a place of social solidarity like we were in the late '60s when this was almost real. But I think what's happening now with automation, with what's happening with like reduction in job quality, things I think are going to get so bad that it will be prominent on the political circuit again as a matter people willing to vote for. In the
Yeah,
last election in Canada, it was one of the top 5 or top 10 issues, at least under polling. It wasn't really talked about by the parties, but polling wise, it was one of the top.
interesting. So it's really
So
building up.
yeah, I mean, and COVID put this on the map again. So I think that
Right.
another good crisis will bring this about.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I'm kind of wondering what that which of the AI crisis will be, and I still kind of thinking it's the self-driving
I can
cars.
guarantee
But
a crisis. I don't know if I can guarantee the
yeah,
crisis.
that's true.
It's
Which crisis? We should have a whole discussion about which will be the crisis that does it. But anyway, where can we find more of your stuff, Floyd?
Yeah, so at ubiworks.ca, you can find a lot of our research, and you can follow us on various channels and get involved in the activism. I'm pretty prolific on Twitter, and a new nonprofit I started called Commonwealth Canada is looking at the impact of how land value taxes could address a lot of the problems we've discussed here today. There is a strong intersection between land value and automation, which maybe we'll discuss in the part 2.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And I really liked
yeah,
your
this is a lot of fun.
another place. I really liked your TED talk. If you search for Floyd's name and TED, it'll show right up on YouTube.
Thank you, thank
Well,
you.
thank you. This has been awesome. Yeah, we got to do a part 2 because we barely touched the surface of this. And as always, you can find us, the Fourth Age, if you go searching on Spotify. I think by the time this comes out, we'll be on YouTube, hopefully, and on Apple Podcasts. Thank you, Floyd.
Okay, thank you.